everyone. Welcome back to Spirit Rescue Talk. I'm your host, Amy Major. And of course, you know my wonderful co host, Jordan Start and Cynthia Maroon. I want to send a big shout out to Cynthia for that new intro that we have for the show. She did an amazing job. I'm sure all of you noticed, like, what's this? This is new. Yes, it is new. It's the first time airing that new intro to the show. We'd love to see your comments, your feedback, your thoughts on it because, it's just a little bit more, a little bit longer to kind of express what we do here on the show, the things that we do talk about. It does get very bright and airy and a wonderful spirituality. And of course, it gets a little dark too for all the different subjects that we talk about. So just give us a little feedback. We'd love to hear from you on that. Today, we actually have a really great guest with us today, Mike Dinkel. He was gracious enough to come on as a guest onto the podcast today. He is a psychic and a medium and a healer as well. He has his own practice in Monterey, and I'm so excited. I was talking with him before I got on the show. I actually went to school in Carmel, which is the town right next to Monterey, and my parents did live in Monterey for a little while. And I was telling him, I was like, you're right near Dennis the Menace Park. And I used to go there when I was a kid. So there was like a lot of memories coming to the surface. And I just love that area. And I invite all of you to go visit Mike in Monterey. At least go to the park. It's a lot of fun to have there. But today we're going to talk a little bit about what Mike does. He does do a lot of healing, some things that you have heard of, some things you haven't. Of course, craniosacral therapy is one of them in Reiki. And then there's something called somato emotional release, which I'm really kind of interested to hear about as well, because, I'm all about releasement and spirit releasement as well. I work with Jordan and Cynthia on that. So, but before we kind of go in and start bombarding him with all our questions today, we're just hoping that he can give a little bit of a background on his story and how he got to where he is today. Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
Hi, doing very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Before we kind of go into a big open discussion, can you tell our guests just a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I've been doing healing work professionally since 2009 at my own business, and really enjoy it. My spiritual life started at a very young age. I was about 2 years old, and I woke up with a flame on my chest in the middle of the night, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm on fire!" And I went to swat it, and each time I went to put the flame out, it would move, and I thought, "Oh, this is really strange." And so I stopped, and it slowly diminished, and I heard the words, "Everything's," or something like, "Everything's going to be okay." And I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." So then I needed to use the restroom, went and did that, came back, and I thought, "Oh, my covers are going to be burned. My mom's going to get upset." And I cleared them out and looked, and there's no burn mark or anything like that. So I told my mom in the morning, and she kind of foo-fooed it and said, "Well, you were probably just dreaming." But no, when you see something like that, it stays in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Then at about 3 years old, I drowned down at the local beach, Lover's Point. And I was playing in the surf area and somehow lost my footing and fell, and the waves pulled me out. I popped up out by the pier, and when I saw where I was, I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to be out here." And then everything went black. The next thing I knew, a gentleman was holding me by my ankles and shaking me, trying to get the water out, and I was crying and screaming. And later I talked to my mom about it, and she said that she saw what happened, and she couldn't swim, and she was also with my brother, who was an infant at that time. So she elbowed the guy next to her and said, "My son's drowning. Can you go in and get him?" And he ran in and got me. What was interesting is he only went up to his waist to get me, and I was in 8 to 10 feet of water when everything went black. And so I asked a friend of mine for past life regression, and she took me back to that point, and it turned out that there were angels that pushed me to this gentleman so that he could grab me and help me. So, and that was quite amazing and traumatic.
They're
Anyway,
there with us, getting
yes,
us
they
through
are.
those moments of crisis. You know,
Yes.
I had a car accident when I was 16, and I specifically remember angel putting a bubble of energy around me. It's almost like the angel wings came around me. We got
Yeah.
hit head on with a semi truck in this tiny
Wow.
VW cabriolet. We got hit by a semi truck. The car was demolished. We didn't even have
Wow.
scratches.
Oh,
No
wow.
scratches, nothing. So I felt the energy of angels around us. So I know exactly what you're talking about. They're
Yeah.
there when we need
Yes,
them.
they are. They certainly are. And what I've learned over time is nobody dies before their time.
Right, right.
So,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. So that must have opened you up quite a bit.
it did. Around somewhere between 5 and 7 years old, I started seeing earthbound spirits, and they were communicating with me or talking with me, and I didn't know what to do. So I
Hmm.
started looking into it, and I was watching Johnny Carson with my parents, and he interviewed Sylvia Brown, who was a psychic and medium. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I wrote down her name, went down to the library and to see if she wrote any books. And sure enough, she wrote a lot of them. And
Hmm.
so I started reading those, and next to those books were other metaphysical books, and I started teaching myself and learning about things. Then at about 10 years old, I started doing healing work, although back then I really didn't know what I was doing. And later on, when I got a psychic reading, the psychic said, you know, you have psychic abilities, mediumship abilities, but did you know you were a healer? And I said, no, I had no idea. And she said, well, has this, and this happened? And I said, yeah, it sure has. And she goes, well, you were helping people to heal, but you were using your own energy. So you need to take some lessons on how to ground real well and how to use divine energy and the energy from Mother Earth to help you to do the healing. So, as they say, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And sure enough, they came, and I learned a lot of different modalities over time.
Wow.
Then, at about 17 years old, I helped cross a lady over that lived next door to us. The house was built in 1910, and she was the wife of the doctor that that they lived together in that house, very old Spanish stucco house.
Hmm.
And I had drove up into our parking, into our driveway and parked. And when I got out, I could feel this energy, you know, similar to what you feel when a spirit is by you. And so I talked with her for about 45 minutes to an hour and calmed her down, talked to her about death and about uh, religion and how a lot of religion has changed. And because she, from what I found out from her, she had an abortion, and she was afraid she was going to go to hell because of that. And so I talked with her, and I recalled what Sylvia Brown had taught was to create a shaft of white light for them to step into and ascend up. And Sylvia said, you know, you sometimes have to convince them to walk into this light. So I did that. And after talking with her, I got her to go up and look into the light. I told her, go up and look up and see if you can see any of your relatives or friends ushering you to come up. And so she did, and she looked up and she goes, oh my gosh, I can see my husband. And he's holding a child. That's my son, my son. And she stepped right into the light, went up, and heaven opened up. or what we call heaven. And I felt this unconditional love. And then it closed after she went in. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. The feeling you feel
Oh,
of
yeah.
our home, what is our true home. And that was my first spirit rescue.
Now, when you're doing this, what made you aware that she was an earthbound spirit? Because a lot of our viewers are like, how can you tell if it's not just a spirit that's walking around in the light or if it is actually a spirit that needs to cross over?
So, in talking to her, I could feel her fear. And Sylvia Browne described earthbound spirits as having basically all the same feelings humans do, except they don't have a body. But when you close your eyes, and you see them in your mind, they often picture themselves as having a body. But she said that they still go through fear, they go through trauma, they go through aches and pains still in their body. They um, have deal with the duality with basically everything we do here on earth. And so when I could feel her fear, I knew that she was an earthbound spirit, a ghost.
Mm.
And because Sylvia described others that come to visit us from what we call heaven, they are full of unconditional love. They no longer have the fear or deal with duality. It's just pure love.
Mm.
And that wasn't present in her. So,
Wow. So, were you ready for something like that to happen?
not really. It was just kind of passed on to me.
Mm.
It the situation required it, and I had read the book about it, and I thought, well, let's see if we can help.
Right.
So I did.
Well, I often find that those of us that are mediums, but also healers, attract wounded people. And when we're mediums, we attract wounded souls
Yeah.
just as much as we attract wounded people, because healers will always attract the wounded. So you're mixing mediumship in with healing. Now you're just a beacon of energy that all wounded souls will now gravitate towards. Because I have so many of students come to me, they're like, why do I attract these souls? What is it about me that they like so much? Like, it's
Yes.
the healing light. You're a
Yeah.
healer, and so you said you were a healer, and these souls recognized it. And not only that, but I'm sure you recognize your guides were placing you exactly where you needed to be that healer.
Yeah. When I was 10 years old and didn't know what I was doing, I would have people come up and they would sit down next to me. My parents were in real estate, so they would often entertain guests, and I would have these adults come and sit next to me, and they would unload all their problems, talking about this and that and this and that, and I would get locked in on them, and nothing else around me mattered. And then they would get up happy as can be and walk off, and I would be like, oh, that was one of those things again. And then later, after I got the psychic reading, she explained all of that and even could see me doing that, and it really helped.
Wow.
So,
So
Mike, when you had that experience and you were like, the first experience helping somebody transition, did it, like, you maybe said, well, hey, maybe I can help, but did you feel like a rush of passion or motivation to do it? Was there fear? Were you just really curious? What did it lead to next for you?
Good question. Um, I was really drawn to be able to do that, and the feeling when heaven, so to speak, opens up really was so amazing that I really enjoyed that, along with being able to help people, to help an earthbound soul in that way. I've since then crossed over thousands of not only people, but animals. And I've taught many people how to do it, and done it remotely, and experienced a lot of interesting things.
It can be very interesting, right? Do you,
Yes.
in your journeys, like, have you ever experienced, like, is it primarily just earthbound souls and spirits and animals? that you crossed? What do you mean by interesting things?
So one remote healing I did, a friend of mine approached me, and she had two friends that were caregivers, and she had a lady. They were telling her about a lady that they were working with, and they would go into her house and things would move. Books would fall off the shelf and lots of other things they described. And my friend said, "Can you help them?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "But you are afraid of ghosts, and I really think it would help you to experience this. So we're going to work together." And she said, "Well, how is that going to work?" And I said, "Well, just trust and know that whatever you see in your mind's eye is real." So I went, I talked with the people, the two ladies that were the caregivers, and they were on Zoom with me, and she was also on Zoom. And I said, "So what we're going to do is close our eyes, and we're going to see the building in front of us." And I said, "What I see is this door, and there's 3 steps up to the door." And she goes, "Yeah, I see that too." And so I said, "So we're going to open the door and go in." And we stepped into the living room, and I described, the hallway that went down to the left and the doorway that was over to the left straight ahead, and that it went to the kitchen. And so we went in, and of course, very often what happens when I go in is they leave. So I started talking to them being the spirits in the room, and inviting them back so I could talk to them and explain, how I can help them. So we ended up, there were 3 of them in there, and we crossed all 3 of them over. And then I opened it up and invited any souls, any earthbound spirits to come and cross over. And there was an old man that came from the streets and walked in, and we crossed him over. Then there was a young child about 7 or 8 years old, and crossed him over. And then there was an older lady, and we crossed her over. And then my friend said, um, are we able to cross other things over? And I said, "What do you mean other things?" And she said, "Well, there's 4 entities in the kitchen, and I don't think they're human." And I said, "Yeah, I felt that also." And I asked them to come forward, and they came forward from the kitchen, and they were extraterrestrials, in a height of about 3 to 4 foot tall. And the 4-foot tall one was doing the speaking, and I asked him, I thought maybe they need to cross over. So I said, "Well, you've seen what has happened, and you've seen the shaft of a white light. Are you ready to cross over?" And he shook his head. And I said, "So are you afraid to cross over?" And he shook his head. And I said, "But you don't want to cross over." And he shook his head again. And I said, "So are you alive and not dead?" And he went like this. And I said, "So you also probably know you're not supposed to be here." And he turned and looked at the shorter one next to him, and the shorter one looked up at him and went like this. And he said, "Yes." And I said, "So you need to leave. You're not supposed to be here, and you can't come back here, and you really shouldn't be doing this with other humans either. So you need to leave, all of you." And the tall one looked down at the little guy, and the little guy goes like this. And so he went like this, and they took 2 steps back and vanished. And I thought, wow, never seen that before. And my friend, "That was incredible." And I said, "Yeah, it was. I've never come across the extraterrestrials doing this work before."
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, they gravitate towards areas of activity because
Ah,
I've been told that they actually use some of the portals that are being generated by spirit activity. And so they'll
oh,
jump into some of the portals. And then because aliens are in a fourth dimensional density, they can see other fourth dimensional beings, which are earthbound spirits. And so they're like, oh, this is interesting. And what's going on over here? So I think it's their curiosity that really brings them into those spaces. And as long as they're not interfering, I've been told they're allowed to observe and to watch in those areas. So I'm not a big fan, as these girls know. I'm not a big fan of aliens as well. But I have been become more lenient on their activity around me. They'll look at me, I'll look at them, and be like, okay, what's up? What's the intention here? What are you trying to do? And they're like, we're just here to observe. And I say, great. The moment you step out of observing into activity, that's when I push you out and I get you to go. Because I do a lot of spirit police work, a lot of security work with spirit, and a lot of entities as well. So it's interesting that you saw that, and they were actually quite kind and generous and respectful to what you were doing. So I always read what's their intention telepathically, even though what we see may not make sense or may seem malice in some way. We're like, what are they doing? We have to look at, okay, what is their intent? And again, it seemed like curiosity, but you did a really great job, with that being your first experience, kind of going in and asking questions. I know a lot of people really would go in and just start blasting white light at them and like, go away, what are you doing here? So I think that you did the right thing by kind of saying, hey, what's going on? Do you need help? Rather than, do we need to hurt you in some way? I wish more people did that.
Yes. And this is something that Amy, like when I was learning under Amy, it's like that we had to kind of go through a process of learning discernment between when you're under threat and when you're not. And what I love about your story is exactly what Amy's saying. As an intuitive, some people who that may have a lot of wounding or a lot of fear-based thinking would automatically assume, because they don't recognize it, they don't understand it, they have to defend themselves, or they have to attack it, or they have the intuition that this isn't right or they shouldn't be there. But instead, you were so, like, even with your first experience, you responded with such spiritual maturity, because you didn't respond like, oh yeah, we have to attack it, and like Amy's saying, blast light at it, get out of here, you're not supposed to be here. Instead, you approached them with respect. Are you this? You approached them with curiosity, and they gave it right back. And I find that in doing spirit work, when you do have interactions with things that are other than earthbound souls, that is essential, that you maintain a respectful attitude, and that you talk about, are you supposed to be here? Like Amy was saying, like, what is your intention? And if you can do that, there can be some understanding and cooperation. And you just did that naturally. And I'm so impressed, Mike. That's great.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I know that, with Jordan being here in the role that she plays in Spirit Rescue, being more of security and working with a lot of different entities that may not come in with greatest intentions, I'm sure, have you experienced anything in your career doing this work where you've come across something that did not have good intentions, may not have been ET, may have been something more? Can you kind of explain that situation and what kind of happened with that?
Sure. So a real good friend of mine who I'd worked on doing healing work on many times, he was in the military and had PTSD, and I was working with him with that. And and then he got into massage work afterwards, and he was learning different things for massage. And he contacted me, excuse me, and said, Mike, I'm having trouble just staying awake or having trouble actually sleeping, and I feel drained all the time. It's been going on for about 1.5 years now, and I'm not sure what's going on. And I said, well, come on in. Let's set you up an appointment, and we'll talk about it and see what I can figure out. So we sat down and talked about it, and the massage tables were upstairs So I said, let's go upstairs and we'll get started and see what we can find out. In walking up the stairs, I couldn't feel his energy. And that was really strange. And so I got him on the massage table, and I always start with an opening prayer, and then I send energy in from the palms of my hands into the body just to kind of warm it up, so to speak. And when I did that, it went down to him and ricocheted off and up to this orb, and it glowed this bright orange with red around the outside of it. And I looked at it and I thought, what is that? And so I sent the energy again, and it did it again. And I said, you're not supposed to leave. You're not supposed to be here. You need to leave. And it glowed even brighter. And I thought, oh, it likes negative energy. It likes that. I'm going to send it love. And so I sent this love energy up towards it. And as soon as it left my hands, my hand got smacked on the back of my hand. And it said, what's that? And I said, it's love. Well, I don't like that. And I said, I know, but you're not supposed to be here and you need to leave. Well, I'm not leaving. And I said, well, I'm going to continue to send you love then. No, I don't like that. I said, well, you have to leave. You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be with my friend. And you're drawing all his energy off of him. And he said, well, I'm not leaving. And I said, okay. And just then, this serpent, kind of like a Chinese dragon, came out of it and started going around me. And I'm going, whoa, that's so cool. And it comes around the back of me. And I'm thinking, this is about where most people would take off running. And it goes back into the orb. It glows orange and red again. And I said, wow, that was cool. And he goes, that didn't scare you? And I said, no, that was really neat. And he goes, well, I'm still not leaving. And I said, well, if you don't leave, I'm going to have to call somebody else in that will escort you away. Well, I'm not leaving. And I said, okay, Archangel Michael, can you come in and help? And before I got the words out, this flash of light came, hit the orb. They both went shooting off. And when that happened, all the love I was sending to it went right into my friend. He jumped up and sat up and he said, what was that? And I said, it was unconditional love. I'm going to go ahead and finish with you, and then I'll tell you everything that took place. So I finished up with him, told him the story, and he goes, oh my gosh, I bet I picked that up when I went to Vietnam to learn massage there. Because while I was there, I went to a few bars and got a little drunk, and I think that's where I picked it up. And I said, was it about 1.5 years ago? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, that's probably what happened.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting to see that. But I'm also curious that it was more curious about you, kind of looking at you like, why isn't this guy scared? It obviously has history of being able to provoke people in a negative way. And then obviously, it was draining your friend of energy. Yeah. So, me with my experience, it sounds like it was more of a manifested entity in some way, because manifested entities need to drain others in order to sustain themselves. They can't exist without feeding off of negativity or feeding off of other people's life force in some way. And because it showed up in an orb form, that's also another symbolic way of manifested entities appearing as well. And he said he picked it up in Vietnam. Can only imagine the amount of energy that's being projected in trauma and crisis and war and famine and anything that would have happened in the location. And in bars, when people project a lot of negative energy, it can manifest and transform into its own separate consciousness and then start feeding off of other people in some way. For some reason, it felt attracted to your friend and stuck with your friend throughout his journey as well. So it tells me your friend may have also been a healer as well, because they do get attracted to people that are healers. They generate more energy in their aura. So it's very interesting that you were able to see that, and it tried to create something of an illusion to scare you, and you're like, whoa, that's really cool, do more. Kind of thing. That's
Yeah.
real. That's great. I'm glad you didn't come across anything that's a true dark entity. They're a little bit harder to deal with, but of course you got Archangel Michael right there on your side. I'm quite jealous that Archangel Michael came right in for you. There's many times I'll call Michael in, and Michael will look peep in. He's like, "Yeah, you can handle this," and he'll walk away. And I'm like, "Come on, Jordan." I'm sure you've had situations like that too with these entities coming in.
Oh yeah.
So,
Oh, certainly. And one thing, Mike, I really appreciate about like the experience that you had is, so as Amy said, I do a lot of work with like some of the darker entities, and spirit law is my go-to rule book. And when you're acknowledging like you're not supposed to be here, you gotta go. This guy's coming for help. I'm like, oh look, you're following the spirit law book. And I find when you've kind of following the rules of the universe and when you call in that additional support, it makes the transition so much smoother because there is rules and there is laws that they do need to follow. And so part of the work that I do a lot of the time is I'm also a healer like yourself. And I always look at the wounding of the experience of the individual and how some of these entities get drawn to them. And so when I was looking at your website and I was looking at the healing modalities, I was like, wow, he's got so many different forms of healing. And so I'm curious for our viewers who may have not heard of craniosacral therapy or somatic emotional release therapy, what are those? And also, I would imagine they kind of might hit different things. What would be the benefit of utilizing these therapies or these healing modalities for somebody?
Good question. So craniosacral work works with your cranial fluid, and it actually has a pulse to it. And when I was reading this online, I thought, how could that be true? And then I read more about how it affects the body and how it's a very slow pulse, about 6 to 12 times a minute. And so I started researching it and was online with the Upledger group because John Upledger is the one who started all this work with craniosacral work. And he explained quite a few things, and I signed up for a class right then and have taken 5 4-day classes with the group and really enjoyed it. But to get back to it, it's a fluid that runs from your tailbone up through your spine and encompasses your whole brain. And it's a gel, and it's very much like the football helmets now have a gel pad inside for impact, and that protects your brain so your brain is not slamming against your skull if you have a head impact. It's a gel that absorbs that. It also encompasses your nerves as they come out of the spine, and it encompasses the spinal fluid that is in your spine, all the nerves that come through the spine. And what you're doing is what Upledger calls working with the weight of a nickel, which is energy work. But they scientifically have to call it that. So you're manipulating the spine with your energy and pulling and stretching it back and forth. So the vertebrae separate and come back and separate and come back and separate and come back. And you do that in working down each vertebrae all the way down. Then you start from the tailbone and work your way back up until you can feel everything loose. Then you do some more stretching and working with that, with your hand on the tail of the spine and your other one at the head, and you're working it back and forth. And you pull with one hand until you feel the other hand move and working it back and forth. And this frees everything up. It allows the fluid around the nerves again, because sometimes they get offset, and that will cause a pinch or a discomfort or a numbness in the body. And so you're working with that. You're working with the bones of the skull, and then there's what's called the avenue of expression, which works with the mouth and the bones of the mouth and the teeth and all of that. And that's taught through the Upledger group. And your doctors up until about 1984 or somewhere around there thought that the skull locked together because of the design that it is, but it actually floats back and forth. And when you do have a head impact, sometimes it misaligns. And so what we're taught to do is to move the plate, like this plate here, and the two side plates and the one in the back, to gently move them and then allow them to fall back into place where they're supposed to be.
Wow.
And that's the basics behind cranial sacral work. There's a 10-step process that you go through, and that you work through everything through that. The somato emotional release is releasing emotions that are trapped in the body or present in the body, and that can be caused by many different things. Sometimes it's an automobile accident, and there's fear trapped in the body. Sometimes it's a traumatic situation that you've been in and it's trapped in the body. And you learn to recognize where that is in the body, and you'll put your hand on top and underneath, and then send a little bit of energy in, and then start talking to the person and asking them questions. Sometimes you can ask them do you have pain in a certain area that is very constant, and that may be an emotional place as well. So you run energy through that while you're talking with them and asking them, how you're doing, how you feel, and what are you feeling now. And there's a process of asking questions that you go through that allows them to release this energy. And when it does, it's sometimes pretty traumatic. The very first time I did it in class, we separated into groups of 3, and there were, 25 tables. So it was a lot of students. And I was the first one in our group to do the session. So I'm talking with this lady and working with her, and suddenly she starts crying. And so I just keep going, and she starts crying more and more and more, to where I'm worried she's not drawing in enough air to cry. I mean, she's like crying and crying, and really loud. And I look around, and everybody's stopped and looking, and I have 4 assistants walking around the table, and the teacher 2 tables away watching. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm doing anything wrong, they're going to let me know. So I keep going and sending this energy in and talking with her. And then she starts laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing. And then she sits up and looks at me, and she goes, "Wow, that's been there a long, long time." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I feel so much better." I said, "Great." So
Wow.
that was the first time in an incredible time. But
Sounds
yeah,
like she was releasing a lot in those moments, because, when people do that, they're actually releasing energy at the same time they're shedding those tears. So the crying meant that it shifted from release to now being able to rejuvenate and be in a state of joy. So really great that you explained it that way.
Yeah, it was really.
I want to tell you something. So I practice emotional freedom technique. I'm a practitioner, and I have similar experiences, because when I'm doing EFT work with people, sometimes emotions that are trapped in the body will start to move towards an exit point,
Oh,
and they'll release that way. And there's crying, and there's upset, and there's this and that. And then sometimes there's spontaneous laughter that follows, because once it's released, it's like, oh my gosh, I feel better. But I wanted to say something to anybody that's listening. Sometimes it can feel kind of like, oh, if I invest in this healing, it's like I'm afraid to face more pain. Like I'm already hurting enough. I don't want it to intensify. And
right.
that is a reasonable concern, and that is a reasonable fear. However, in doing my own work, I want to share a very brief story. Is one of my trainings that I did, because I've done different types of EFT training, but one of them that I did, I had to work with another student. And we were processing something non-verbally. I didn't have to say anything. And I was just holding the thoughts, and I started tapping, and I started, because use a tapping motion, I guess I should
Uh-huh.
say, when you're doing emotional freedom technique. It's like acupressure for those kind of who's never heard of it. But I started holding the thought, and it started to shift, and I started crying uncontrollably.
Wow.
And the practitioner, like the other student, was like kind of like what you're saying, like was like, oh God, okay, like, oh my gosh, and it was remote. So she wasn't even there with me in person. And I
Uh-huh.
could feel her as an intuitive, I could feel her worry. And I could feel that she was starting to feel like, am I doing something wrong? She's spiraling. I'm not able to get this. But what she couldn't feel was that although I was crying intensely, I could feel relief inside. I
Oh,
was just
nice.
overwhelmed. So it wasn't actual pain distress, it was just release. And so once I could talk, because this was like 40 minutes, okay? Like
Yeah.
I was like a ball of mess. And once I could catch my breath and I could talk, I said, okay, we gotta stop for a minute because I gotta tell you something. I'm okay. I'm like, I'm really okay. I know you're probably worried and this looks really bad, but inside, I'm feeling settled. I'm starting to feel relief. So for anybody that's kind of curious or about their own healing journey, or thinking like, hey, maybe I want to work with Mike. Maybe I want to explore my own release. But oh God, this sounds confronting. Don't be afraid,
Right.
because a lot of the time with energy work, it's more gentle than you think.
Oh, yeah.
The hardest part is sometimes giving yourself permission to be messy
Yeah.
more than the pain of the emotion being released, because there is a feeling of relief attached to it. And I just wanted to offer that so people can consider that, you know. I
Well,
don't know what you think about that, but that's
yeah.
my opinion.
That's great. Good
Yeah.
idea.
Now I have to ask because, Jordan, Cynthia, and I, we all do something called spirit releasement. And we do a lot of techniques quite similar to what you just described, but working through the chakras, different organs of the body, different placements
Uh-huh.
of, activity. It may start as mental and emotional, but as we dig deeper, we find there's an actual consciousness buried deep inside some of the wounding that people hold. Have you ever experienced this before, where when someone's releasing and it's not releasing, or you're just as a medium energetically sensing there's more going on here in this wound than just emotion?
Um, I can't recall any time that I've actually experienced another entity in the body. Um, but the emotions sometimes feel like that, like it's not it's not part of their body.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's separate from their body, and it shouldn't be there.
Yep.
Things like that.
Oh
So
yeah.
that would be
Yeah.
similar.
Well, it's an
Yeah.
emotional detachment in
Yes.
some way, where the emotions are able to actually form in a separate space, location in the body, and seem separate from the main form of consciousness we call our soul in
Yes.
our thought process. So it does seem like it's foreign
Yeah.
inside, but rather just a condensed version, or a smaller condensed form of consciousness focused mainly on emotion in
Yeah.
that area. We have I've experienced thousands of cases where I do step in and there is an actual consciousness very deep that is separate from the individual that I'm working on. And that's
Oh,
what we call
wow.
spirit attachment. Some of them are entity attachments, non-human souls that are very deep. I follow a lot of the work of Dr. William Baldwin that does spirit releasement as well. And they
Oh,
actually use a lot of the same techniques that you have actually just explained by
mm,
stepping in and releasing through what I would call trigger questions. These triggered questions go in and they provoke emotional and mental responses that actually break up these fragments of condensed energy, which releases from the individual, sometimes emotions, sometimes belief systems, sometimes memory imprints. And deep within, we see spirit activity. Hey, you're not supposed to be there. One of my favorite experiences was stepping into someone's solar plexus. And because she had a lot of distension in her stomach, she had a lot of discomfort. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. I stepped in. Next thing I know, I'm seeing a spirit form inside her solar plexus. It was the image of a hobo roasting hot dogs over a campfire. And I'm looking at him like, what? Am I making this up? And he turns over his shoulder and he looks at me. So he recognizes I can see him.
Yeah.
And he's like, I ain't doing no harm. Go away. Leave me be. And I'm like, I start laughing hysterically. And the woman's like, what? What's wrong? I'm like, I'll tell you later. Perfectly fine. Where I actually get him to cross over. But I'm like, who would believe that? Who would believe
Right.
we have fragments of other people's consciousness buried deep within our body? So we do a lot of that spirit releasement. And maybe I'm supposed to give you that awareness today because I think your guides might be kind of getting you ready for some of that activity. But more particularly because you are a medium healer, it's going to happen. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying, prepared.
In you telling your story, I do recall a situation like that. I wrote the psychic fairs,
Mhm.
and I was working on this lady. And so when I took a class about balancing chakras, we went through a whole bunch of things, learned a bunch of things, and then we split up. And the teacher, I was one of 12 people, a man and 11 women, learning this. So the teacher says, okay, put your hand on the first chakra. And I thought, I can't do that. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to pull the chakra out of the body and work on it and then drop it back down. So I was doing that. And at the psychic fair, I pulled the first chakra up and I looked, and here's this little guy in the chakra and had like an African mask on. And he looked up at me, and I looked down at him, and I said, you're not supposed to be there. And you need to leave. You're not supposed to be there. And so then I took the chakra and started spinning it, and he went flying out and dropped the chakra back in. And then I brought it back up to make sure he was gone and dropped it back down in and then went on. And I thought, how am I going to tell this lady what just was in her first chakra? So I didn't tell her. But yeah, that was an interesting experience. That was, golly, many, many years ago.
Wow. Well, I have had that experience as well. My guides have since, because I was, I admit it, I was always the first to go in with like weapons, rip them apart, tell them to get out. And, with all the experiences I've had in my life, I was first to attack, ask questions later. And my guides have slowly gotten me to transform my technique just a little bit, where I'm now diplomatic. I will step in, I will see something. And before I'm like, oh, you're not supposed to be here, I'll question it. Like, why are you here? Are you a fragment of this person's other form of consciousness in another life? Are you a fragment of karma that's supposed to be resolved in this person? Are you a relative, the root chakra? That's the bloodline. Are you a relative that's here to observe and clear your own karma through this person's life experience? So I start questioning the entity or the energy that's in there, finding out does this serve this entity and does it serve the person? Because I'm not going to immediately assume that they're not supposed to be there. I always did.
Yeah.
Guns blazing, like, get out. And now my guides are like, there's more going on than you recognize. And sometimes we allow these spirits to step in to observe and to learn and to grow and to heal through our personal life experiences. So talk to the entity, talk to the guides, talk to the person's soul. Is there a contract? Is there an agreement? If
Right.
none of that exists and the soul, the spirit's there that's not supposed to be, then tell them to get out of here. I'll bring
Yeah.
in an army that will get you out. So it's can be very tricky, and I've learned a lot through my experiences through the years, because my guides have a tendency to let me fail quite often, and let me trip over my work just a little bit, and then like, okay, Amy, come here. Let me tell you what you should have done in that experience. So I keep hearing Spirit's going to be having to do a lot of work in this going forward. So I'd love to work with you going forward, and to see what you can do, because there are so many people that need to be healed,
Yeah.
that have these experiences, and we're so grateful to have you here and to connect with you on the show. And you obviously are an amazing healer. God put you on the right path, and you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And it is such a blessing, isn't it, to be able to
It
be on the path you know that you were
it
born to
is.
do.
Yes,
So
it really
we
is.
are grateful to have you. How can people reach out and connect to you if they feel like, oh my gosh, Mike, he's absolutely going to be the healer I've been searching for? How can they reach out and connect to you?
Well, they can go to my website, MikeDinkel.com, which is right over here.
Yep.
And I have my own business. I have an office in Monterey, but I also do remote healing. I've worked with people all over the United States and in Germany, the United Kingdom, and Brazil, and Israel, all over the world, Australia. So, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. Through my website, you'll find my phone number and information and my story of my life and all the things that I do.
Wow.
Nice.
It has been amazing. Thank you so much again for
Sure.
coming on and sharing your story and your experience and advice for our viewers today. And we had a really great show. We're really excited about what's to come. I think we're actually getting ready and preparing for a Christmas special in the next week or two. We're all going to be dressed up for that. So kind of wait and see how that goes. And I know some of you might actually have some comments, questions, and concerns, or anything that might pop up and you want to connect to us. And Cynthia, how can they reach out and connect?
They can email us at spiritrescuetalk@gmail.com. You can let us know what your thoughts, what you're thinking. If you have a question, if there's something you want to hear more about on the show, like, let us know. We read everything that we receive. Yeah.
Yes, we do. And please try to keep it positive. There's enough negativity out there in the world. And again, these are our views, these are our experiences, and we'd love to hear your experiences and things that maybe you have conflicting views on, because again, we all learn from each other. It's perfectly fine. And we're here to all work together. So thank you for staying with us today, and reach out to Mike if you have any questions, and we look forward to seeing you next time.